She had spent half her life chasing a shadow, pouring money, time, and every ounce of determination into finding the man who had saved her 18 years ago. Olivia Hartmann had hired the sharpest investigators, combed through databases most people didn't even know existed, and followed leads into places that would make ordinary people turn back. But nothing, no search, no clue ever brought her close enough to touch him. What she didn't know was that he'd been close the whole time. Close enough to hear her voice through the walls, close enough to watch her from the dark corners of her own building, and close enough to save her again, without her ever realizing it. Olivia stood at the wide glass windows of her office, staring out at the glittering lights below. 36 floors up, she ruled over a corporate empire worth billions. She was 35, disciplined to the core, with a sharp mind that could cut down a room full of doubters. Her reflection in the glass was a picture of controlled chestnut hair pulled into a sleek knot, green eyes that didn't miss a thing, a tailored suit worth more than most cars. But beneath that flawless armor lived a woman who had been haunted every day by a memory she couldn't let go. A single moment of terror, followed by a pair of calm gray eyes and a voice that told her not to give up. It had been chaos, metal screaming against metal, the sting of smoke in her lungs, the heavy crush of twisted steel pinning her in place. She'd been 18, certain she was about to die, when he appeared. He wasn't panicked like the others. His movements were precise, deliberate. His voice was steady as he worked to pull her free. "Stay with me," he'd said. "You're going to make it out." She remembered the warmth of his hands, the small scar on his wrist, and how he seemed to see straight through her fear. 43 minutes later, she was in the back of an ambulance. And he was gone. No name, no goodbye, just vanished. In the years that followed, Olivia built her life around success, maybe to prove that his effort hadn't been wasted. She became a prodigy in business, launching companies from nothing, selling them for millions, and moving on to the next big thing. By 30, she was a billionaire. By 32, she was untouchable in the boardroom. But in the quiet hours, when the meetings were over and the city outside was dark, her mind would drift back to those gray eyes. She dated, but no one ever measured up to the ghost who had once saved her. No one else made her feel that her life was worth fighting for. 3 years ago, she had made the decision that shocked even her closest advisors. She would find him, no matter what it took. $50 million later, she still had nothing, no name, no address, no proof he even existed beyond her own memory. And yet, she couldn't stop. What Olivia didn't realize was that her search was no longer just hers. Someone else was watching it closely. Someone who knew that the deeper she dug, the closer she came to uncovering truths that could get her killed. And one of those truths was that her savior was standing right outside her office door every single night. Olivia had grown used to the silence of the building after hours, the way her footsteps echoed in the empty hallways once the last meeting ended. But she never noticed the man who moved like a shadow down those same corridors, pushing a cleaning cart, glancing only briefly through the glass walls of her office as he passed. To most, he was invisible, just another night janitor. To him, she was a constant watch, a living mission. His name, at least the one he used now, was Daniel Weiss. 38 years old, tall, lean, with the controlled movements of someone who had learned the hard way that hesitation could get you killed. He wasn't here to clean. He was here to protect. For 3 years, Daniel had been quietly neutralizing threats Olivia didn't know existed. A delivery driver who seemed too interested in the executive parking level. A maintenance worker whose credentials didn't check out. An assistant who had a habit of being in the wrong place at the wrong time with a camera in her bag. None of them had gotten close enough to hurt her. Daniel made sure of that. He never thought she'd notice him until her $50 million search started making noise in circles he recognized all too well. The kind of people who didn't just watch from the shadows. They moved in them. What Olivia's private investigators didn't understand was that someone didn't want to be found. And Daniel, he'd perfected the art of staying hidden. He'd seen her investigation ripple outward, touching military archives, old emergency records, even classified personnel files. And every time she got close to a possible lead, he'd shift his cover, erase the trail, and make it seem like she was chasing a phantom. He told himself it was to protect his operational security. But deep down, it was something else. He wasn't ready for her to know the truth. Not yet. The truth was, Daniel had been 20 when he pulled her from that wreck. It wasn't part of his orders. He was off duty, driving home from a training exercise, when he saw the smoke. He didn't think. He just acted. And in those 43 minutes, as he cut and pried and lifted until her body was free, something in him shifted. She'd looked at him like he was the only thing keeping her alive, and maybe he was. When the paramedics took over, he slipped away, intending to check on her later. But later never came because the wrong people started asking the wrong questions about why he'd been there. Now, 18 years later, fate had placed him right back in her orbit, except this time the danger was different. If her search continued, she wouldn't just find him, she'd find the enemies he'd made along the way. And they wouldn't hesitate to use her to get to him. That's why, tonight, as Daniel leaned against the mop handle in the dimly lit hallway outside her office, he made a decision. He was going to reveal himself, but only on his terms. And if she didn't believe him, they might not both survive what was coming. Olivia's search had become an obsession, the kind that burned through both money and common sense. Her head of security had already warned her too many questions in the wrong places would bring attention she didn't want. But she didn't care. Every morning, she woke up thinking about the man who had saved her, and every night, she went to bed knowing she was no closer to finding him. What she didn't realize was that the closer she got, the more she was walking straight toward danger. And Daniel could see the threat forming like a storm on the horizon. It started small, an unfamiliar car parked outside the building 2 nights in a row, the same figure leaning against it, smoking, eyes always scanning. Then came the calls to her assistant's private phone from an untraceable number. Daniel picked up on it all. Years in hostile environments had taught him to notice patterns, and these patterns weren't random. He followed quietly, blending into the night, watching the watchers. What he found made his gut tighten, a pair of men, disciplined in their movements, communicating without words. They weren't here to rob her. They were here to study her. That was when Daniel made his first move. He intercepted one of the men in the parking level, catching him off guard. The encounter lasted less than a minute, and when it was over, the man was gone, vanished into the night with nothing left behind but a phone that Daniel crushed under his boot before dropping it into a drain. He knew the message would get back to whoever had sent them. She's protected. Stay away. But messages like that didn't always get the intended response. Sometimes, they came back louder. The next week, Olivia's investigators hit what they thought was a breakthrough, in ex-military record matching the vague description she'd given. Daniel recognized the name instantly. It wasn't him, but it was someone he'd worked with, someone who was dead because they'd trusted the wrong people. That was when he realized he couldn't just erase her trail anymore. The circle was closing too fast. If she kept digging, she'd pull herself into the same world he'd spent years trying to shield her from. That night, as the clock neared midnight, Daniel stood outside her office, the hum of the city below barely reaching the quiet of the high-rise. He knew this was it, the moment he'd been avoiding. He pushed the cart down the hall, stopped at her door, and listened. She was still there, tapping away at her laptop. He took a breath, steady and measured. The first words would matter. The first look would matter even more. And once he stepped through that door, there would be no going back for either of them. Olivia didn't hear him at first. Her focus was locked on the glow of her laptop screen, eyes scanning lines of data her investigators had just sent her. There was something in those files, some detail she couldn't quite name, that made her pulse quicken. She rubbed her temples, replaying the face from her memory, those gray eyes that had anchored her when everything around her was chaos. She barely noticed the quiet knock until it came a second time, firmer, deliberate. "Yes?" she called, glancing toward the glass door. The man in the Navy janitor's uniform stepped inside, his cart parked neatly in the hall. Daniel didn't move further than the threshold. For a long second, neither of them spoke. She had seen him before, of course, passing by in the evenings, wiping down surfaces, emptying trash bins. But there was something different about him now. His posture was too straight, his gaze too steady. "You've been looking for someone," he said, his voice calm, measured. Olivia frowned. "Excuse me." He didn't repeat himself. Instead, he stepped forward just enough for the light to catch the faint scar on his wrist. Her breath caught before she could stop it. She knew that scar. In an instant, memories slammed into her: smoke, metal, the suffocating weight, and that voice telling her she'd make it. "It's you," she whispered, half in disbelief, half in shock. Daniel didn't smile, didn't confirm. He just said, "We need to talk." Not here. Every instinct told her to demand answers, to press him for the truth she'd chased for 18 years. But something in his eyes stopped her. There was an edge there, an alertness that made her skin prickle. This wasn't just a reunion. There was danger in the air, sharp and invisible. They took the service elevator down in silence. Daniel scanned every corner before stepping into the underground parking level. "What I'm about to tell you," he began, "doesn't leave us. You've been digging into things you don't understand. People are noticing. Dangerous people." Olivia bristled. "I've been searching for the man who saved my life. That's all." Daniel shook his head. "That's never all. Your search has crossed lines it shouldn't have. The people who are watching you now, they don't forgive mistakes." She opened her mouth to speak, but he cut her off. "And if you keep going, you're going to hand them the one weakness they need: your life." Before she could respond, a sharp metallic echo rang through the garage. Footsteps. Daniel's head snapped toward the sound, his whole body shifting into a stance she'd never seen before, coiled and ready. "Get in the car," he said, low and firm. Olivia hesitated only a second before moving. The footsteps grew louder, closer, until a shadow broke from behind a pillar. Daniel was already moving, stepping between her and the stranger. Olivia didn't see what happened next, only a blur of motion, the stranger stumbling back, and the cold slam of a car door as Daniel shoved her inside. The engine roared to life, and as they sped out into the night, Olivia realized two things. The man she had been searching for was far more dangerous than she'd ever imagined. And he wasn't just here to answer her questions. He was here to keep her alive. The city lights streaked past in a blur as Daniel drove, one hand steady on the wheel, the other resting lightly near the gear shift. He didn't speak, didn't glance at her, but every few seconds his eyes flicked to the mirrors, scanning. Olivia sat rigid in the passenger seat, her heart hammering in her ears. She wanted to demand answers, to tear the truth out of him right there in the moving car, but something in the taut set of his jaw told her now wasn't the time. The silence between them was thick, and underneath it she could feel the hum of danger, real, immediate, pressing in on them from all sides. When they finally slowed, it wasn't in front of any place she recognized. Daniel guided the car down a narrow ramp into another parking structure, older, emptier, the kind of place no one lingered in after dark. He killed the engine and turned to face her fully for the first time. "You're not safe," he said, his voice low and even. "You think you've been hunting for me. But the truth is, you've been leading others straight to you. Every question you've asked, every record you've pulled, they've been watching, and they've been getting ready." Olivia's pulse quickened. "Who are they?" she asked. Daniel didn't hesitate. "People you don't want to meet. People who make their living off turning other people's weaknesses into weapons. And thanks to your search, they think you're carrying something worth more than your life." She frowned. "All I wanted was to find you, to say thank you." He shook his head. "And I told you that's never all. Your name, your company, your influence, it's currency to them. The moment they saw how far you'd go to find me, they knew exactly how to use you." She stared at him, trying to piece together what he wasn't saying. "You've been here this whole time, haven't you? Watching me, protecting me." His expression didn't change. 3 years, for months, 17 days. The precision of it made her breath hitch. "Why?" she whispered. He looked away, toward the dark corners of the garage. "Because once, a long time ago, you trusted me with your life. I don't take that lightly." Before she could reply, the soft crackle of a radio echoed faintly through the concrete space. Daniel's head tilted, listening. A voice, distorted but sharp, murmured something she couldn't make out. His eyes locked on hers. "We're not alone." In one motion, he reached under his seat, pulling out a small black case and sliding it across her lap. "Open it." Her fingers fumbled with the latches until it snapped open, revealing a compact handgun nestled in foam. She froze. "I can't dash." "You can," he cut in firm. "And you will, if it comes to it." The footsteps were closer this time, heavier, deliberate. Daniel slid out of the car, keeping low, moving with the precision of someone who'd done this 1,000 times. Olivia's grip tightened around the weapon, her breath shallow. Shadows moved between the support columns, 2, maybe 3 figures. Then a voice rang out from the darkness. "We only want her." Daniel's reply was cold, final. "Then you're already too late." What happened next was a blur. Sharp commands barked in clipped tones, the crash of metal against concrete, a grunt of pain. Olivia could only catch fragments through the windshield. Daniel moving like he was born for this. Every motion calculated, every strike efficient. One figure went down hard. Another staggered back, clutching his shoulder. The third melted into the dark, retreating. Daniel yanked open her door, his breathing steady despite the fight. "We need to move. Now." As they sped away again, Olivia realized two terrifying truths. The people chasing her wouldn't stop, and the man driving her into the night wasn't just the hero from her past. He was someone who lived in the shadows, someone who had made enemies that could erase a person from existence without leaving a trace. And now, because of her search, those enemies knew her name. They drove for what felt like hours, though Olivia suspected Daniel was deliberately weaving through side streets, doubling back, and changing lanes in patterns meant to shake anyone following them. The tension in the car was unrelenting, a heavy coil wound tight between them. She kept stealing glances at him, his eyes always moving, his hands steady, his jaw locked in silent calculation. The man she had remembered all these years as a quiet savior was something else entirely now. This wasn't just a rescuer. This was someone who had lived too long in a world where trust could get you killed. When he finally pulled into a dim, abandoned warehouse lot, the silence was broken only by the ticking of the cooling engine. "We're staying here for a while," he said, already scanning the perimeter. Olivia stepped out cautiously, the night air cold against her skin. "You still haven't told me who they are," she said, her voice sharper now. Daniel's gaze locked on hers. "People I used to work with. People who know how to find anyone, anywhere. And thanks to you, they know exactly where to look." She flinched at the accusation. "I didn't know, Dash. You didn't want to know," he cut in. "Because knowing would mean understanding the kind of danger you've been walking into." Inside, the warehouse smelled faintly of oil and dust, the space lit by a single overhead bulb. Daniel dragged an old table to the center and pulled a map from his jacket, spreading it out. "This is everyone I've seen circling you in the last 2 months," he said, pointing to marks that Olivia recognized as dates and locations. "They've been testing your security, looking for gaps. I've closed most of them before you noticed. But tonight proved something. They're ready to take you, not just watch you." Olivia stared at the marks on the map, realizing with a chill how close some of them were to her home, her office, even the cafe she stopped at most mornings. "So what now?" she asked. Daniel's jaw tightened. "Now, you disappear. No phones, no credit cards, no contact with anyone you know. You stay with me, and I make sure they can't touch you." She let out a disbelieving laugh. "Disappear? I have a company to run. I can't just vanish." He stepped closer, his voice dropping to a low, sharp edge. "You can if the alternative is ending up in a place no one will ever find you." She wanted to argue, but the memory of those footsteps in the garage and the cold certainty in Daniel's voice stopped her. Still, part of her burned with the need for answers. "If I'm trusting you with my life, then I want the truth. Everything. Why you left that night. Why you've been hiding from me." Daniel studied her for a long moment, then turned away. "The truth is dangerous, Olivia. But if you stay with me long enough, you'll hear it all." A sudden crash echoed from somewhere deep in the warehouse, metal clanging against concrete. Daniel's head snapped up, his hand going to the small of his back where Olivia knew a weapon was hidden. "Stay here," he ordered. But as he moved toward the shadows, Olivia realized something. She wasn't sure she wanted to be left alone in the dark. Not here, not with the feeling that someone else was already in the building. Daniel moved like a shadow, his footsteps silent on the concrete as he advanced toward the far end of the warehouse. Olivia's heart pounded in her chest, every muscle tensed. She strained to listen, catching faint whispers too low to make out, but enough to know they weren't alone. She gripped the edge of the table for balance, eyes darting between the dim corners and the door they'd come through. Then, in the span of a breath, the single overhead bulb flickered and went out. The warehouse plunged into darkness. A rush of air brushed past her, followed by the sharp sound of a struggle boot scuffing the floor, the dull thud of a body hitting metal. Olivia's instincts screamed to stay hidden, but the silence that followed was unbearable. "Daniel," she called softly. No answer. She took a cautious step forward, her hands trembling. Then, from the black, his voice came calm but edged with urgency. "Move to me. Now." She followed the sound, and a moment later, his hand closed firmly around her arm. guiding her through the shadows. They emerged through a side exit into the freezing night air. Daniel didn't stop until they reached the car. "We've got minutes before they regroup," he said, sliding into the driver's seat. Olivia climbed in, adrenaline buzzing through her veins. "Who were they?" she asked, her voice breaking. He started the engine, eyes scanning the mirrors. "The ones I told you about. And they're not going to stop until they either get what they want, or we take away their reason." They drove hard, leaving the warehouse far behind, until the lights of the city faded into the black outline of the countryside. At last, Daniel pulled onto an unmarked gravel road, winding deep into the trees until they reached a secluded cabin. "Safe house," he said simply. Inside, it was sparse but secure reinforced doors, blackout curtains, and no visible electronics. Olivia turned to him, the weight of the past 18 years pressing down on her. "So this is it. I just disappear?" He met her gaze, his expression unreadable. "This is where you get to live, but only if you trust me completely." For the first time since she'd found him, Olivia felt the full gravity of her choice. The man she had been chasing was no longer just a savior from her past. He was the only barrier between her and people who would erase her without hesitation. In the quiet of that cabin, she understood that finding him had changed everything. She wasn't going back to her old life. Not yet. Maybe not ever. And as Daniel locked the door behind them, the reality settled in. Her search was over, but the fight to stay alive had only just begun.